The final update to Iceborne is here, and with it comes one of the toughest challenges in the game. Fatalis the Black Dragon will test even the best of hunters. So I'm Darcblade with an Anti-Fatalis build for the Sword and Shield in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now, as always, an anti-build, sometimes referred to as a counter build, is a build or set that is made to take on a specific monster in the game. And whilst in all honesty Fatalis can be taken on with multiple sets, the builds featured in this series are aimed to make the hunt more manageable. When it comes to the Sword and Shield and taking on Fatalis, the weapon is perfectly capable of dealing enough damage to bring down the monster. The only tricky part when it comes to the Sword and Shield and taking on the Black Dragon is breaking its horns. The Sword and Shield is very good when it comes to sustained damage, however when it comes to burst damage, which is kind of needed to break the horns effectively, the weapon can struggle a little bit. So with that said, you have to take every opportunity to attack the horns when Fatalis' head is low enough. This Anti-Fatalis build for the Sword and Shield though is an all-rounder build, featuring lots of DPS skills, quality of life skills and even defensive skills. So for this build you'll need the Sapphire Crested Crown beta, the Escadora Soul beta, the Sapphire Crested Vambraces beta, the Sapphire Crested Belt beta and the Escadora Sheaves beta. I'm also using a Wormsbane Charm 5 and for my weapon I'm using the Elatrion Star. This has a health regen augmentation and elemental up augmentation. As for the specialist tools, as always I've gone for the Temporal and Rocksteady Mantle for defensive purposes. So when it comes to the jewels you've got a ton to play around with. So first of all I've gone for Tenderizer jewels to max out the weakness exploit skill. I've then gone for a Shaver jewel for the Clutch Claw boost skill, Dragon jewel to max out dragon attack, a defense jewel to get defense boost at least till level 4, we'll explain why later, a hard fire protection jewel for the fire resistance skill, protection jewels for divine blessing, fervor jewels for the resentment skill, destroyer jewels for the part breaker skill, a shield jewel for the guard up skill, and evasion jewels for the evade window skill. As for the jewels on the mantles, I've gone for heavy artillery jewels. Now, I will say this, that a lot of these jewels are optional. You don't need hard fire resistance, for example. You don't need necessarily the Shaver jewel, especially with the Sword and Shield, as it still has a move that can tenderize in one hit. You don't necessarily need the shield jewel, which gives you the guard up skill. This is just in case of emergencies where you can't dodge an attack. So there's lots of options here, and you can switch out jewels here and there to what you personally like to use. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina. When you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables, you have a raw attack of 413 with a decent chunk of purple sharpness. You have 20% base affinity, which can easily be 70% when you're taking into account weakness exploit. You have a dragon elemental rating of 970. Please note that both the dragon rating shown here as well as the base affinity are with the Dragon Vein Awakening buff in effect. You have low Elder Seal, and you'll have a very strong defense of 1126. That is strong against every element, especially ice and especially fire. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you have Dragon Attack at level 6. This will increase the dragon rating and damage of this build. Fatalis is weakest to the dragon element, so when picking a weapon that has an element, dragon is always the best option. You'll also have Resentment level 5. This is a skill that kicks in whenever you have a red portion of health on your health bar. When this happens, you'll gain increased raw attack. And as we're using the Dragon Vein Awakening set bonus, which normally leaves a portion of red health on our health bar, thanks to the set bonus's health drain, Resentment should be active for the majority of the hunt. Anyway, next up is Evade Window at level 5, our main defensive skill, which increases the invulnerability frames when we perform evades and dodges. Yes, the Sword and Shield does have a shield which allows it to block attacks, but for the purpose of this hunt we're going to be mainly avoiding attacks rather than blocking them. Next up is Defense Boost at level 4. Normally I wouldn't advise going for Defense Boost, but as we're using the set bonus element conversion thanks to the Escadora armor, getting Defense Boost to at least level 4 is advisable. Defense Boost is a skill that increases your defensive ratings, and at level 4 or above it also provides us extra elemental resistances, which thanks to that set bonus is converted into even more elemental damage. You have Health Boost at level 3, which allows our health to get to that maximum of 200. You have Fire Resistance level 3, which is an optional skill for this build, which gives us increased fire resistance. But on top of that, thanks to the element conversion, it also gives us increased elemental damage. Anyway, you have Weakness Exploit at level 3, which is a skill that increases our affinity so long as we're attacking monster weak points. And should these weak points be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity is even greater. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us an extra 50% affinity. You have Part Breaker level 3, which is a useful skill for the Fatalis hunt. Basically it's a skill that increases our chances at breaking monster body parts, which we've taken in order to break Elatrion's horns a little bit more easily. If we don't break its horns by phase 3, then its flame attacks turn blue, which can potentially one-shot hunters. Next up is Divine Blessing at level 3, which is a skill that gives us a chance at taking reduced damage when we take a hit from a monster. However, this isn't a guaranteed chance, so it can be risky at times. But it's a nice backup for if we mess up the evade window dodges. You also have Blight Resistance level 1, a byproduct of the armor, but it's still useful. It basically reduces the time that elemental blights remain active on our hunter. You have Critical Boost level 1, which again is another byproduct. This build isn't really heavy when it comes to affinity. Instead, we're focusing more on raw elemental damage and raw attack damage instead of critting the monster. But crit boost can still increase our damage. Basically, whenever we crit a monster, the hit that crit will do increase damage. However, this damage is only classed as increased raw attack damage. Anyway, next is Guard Up level 1, which is an optional skill thanks to the shield jaw we're using. This allows us to block unblockable attacks. Some of Fatalis' attacks, namely its sustained flamethrower attacks, can be blocked but only if you have Guard Up. And so we've taken this as an emergency backup plan to if we're unable to roll out of the way of an incoming attack. Next up is Clutch Claw Boost level 1. Again, this is an optional skill. Clutch Claw Boost for light weapons, such as the Sword and Shield, makes it easier for us to tenderize monster body parts. It only takes one Clutch Claw attack now. However, this is optional. The Sword and Shield still has the ability to tenderize in one hit or one combo, even without the Clutch Claw Boost. This is if you perform the Claw Uppercut. But sometimes it can be tricky to pull off, so I've taken the Clutch Claw Boost via the Shaver Jaw just for a little bit of quality of life. But like I said, it's optional and you can replace it if you so desire. And then finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have Heavy Artillery level 2. This is a skill that increases the damage from the cannons and ballista, basically the heavy artillery found around Trade Castle, by 100%. So always make sure you have a mantle ready before firing the cannons and such. And then finally, when it comes to the set bonuses, you'll have two of them. First of all is the Safi Jiva Seal, Dragon Vein Awakening. This is a skill that kicks in whenever you have your weapon drawn. With your weapon drawn, you'll gain increased base affinity and elemental damage. But there is a downside. With each swing of your weapon, it will also drain your health, leaving a portion of red health on your health bar, which in turn will activate the Resentment skill, which we talked about a little while ago. But this can be risky. If that red health builds up and you get hit, there's a chance that you can cart. However, should you continuously attack a monster, then a heal will be initiated, healing you for the health that the Dragon Vein Awakening drained. You can also counter this slightly as well with the health regen augmentation. And then finally, you'll also have Elatrion Divinity Element Conversion, which converts a portion of our elemental resistances into elemental damage. So there we have it. That is the build I recommend for taking on Fatalis with the Sword and Shield. As you can see, it is a little bit of jack of all trades build in all honesty. It has DPS options, defensive options and quality of life options. But with that being said, even this build comes with pros and cons. The biggest pro for this build is its damage output. It has both very high raw and elemental damage, which should allow you to take on Fatalis quite effectively. On top of that, this build has quite a few defensive options thanks to Evade Window, Defense Boost, Fire Resistance, Health Boost, Divine Blessing and more, which should add to your survivability when taking on the Black Dragon. And then finally, when it comes to the pros, is this build has quality of life skills as well, thanks to Part Breaker, Blight Resistance, Guard Up, Clutch Claw Boost and so on. This can all make the hunt feel a little bit more easier than it is. But this build does have cons. The two biggest cons for this build include the Dragon Vein Awakening health drain, which isn't that big an issue but it's still classed as a con, because there's a chance, especially if you're not hitting the monster with your attacks, that it can leave you at risk. And the other con for this build is it doesn't quite have that 100% affinity. This build has instead favoured for increased raw attack as well as raw elemental damage instead of going for the affinity and trying to crit a monster. But regardless, even with these pros and cons, this build is very effective at taking down the monster. Like I said, the only aspect you have to worry about is trying to break the horns at least once with this build so you can survive the later phases. But hell, if you're up for the challenge and want to take on Fatalis with blue flames, then this build can still take down the monster quite quickly. So there we have it, that is the build I recommend for taking on Fatalis with the Sword and Shield. Of course, as you farm the monster more and more, you'll gain Fatalis weaponry and gear, which is some of the best in the game. But until then, this build will work just fine. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you an Anti-Fatalis build for the Sword and Shield in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.